When I was a kid, my family lived on a farm. Not the pigs and chickens sort of farm. The crop rotations done once or twice a year by the neighbor 15 minutes down the side road sort of farm. School was a morning bus ride away, and the nearest Walmart was 2 towns over. My summers were spent planting in the garden, and we worked through the fall collecting firewood from the bush at the back of our property. My favorite season was spring. It was always too wet and cold to get any housework done, and the fields seemed to come alive with the new year's growth. The April showers would soak the ground and make a perfect muddy wonderland all for me. I didn't have a lot of friends at school, and anyone I could consider a friend lived in town, so I spent a lot of time wandering in the mud. One particularly damp spring morning, when a thick fog swallowed up our neighbors' distant farmhouses, I snuck out to the train tracks. My parents had warned me never to walk on them, and so, even though they were rusty and hadn't been used in decades, I kept to our side of the fence line. The path beside the fence stretched the length of the farm, its entrance to the bush barely visible, but I knew it was there. While splitting wood the previous fall, I had taken one of those Mega Bloks night toys with me, the ones with the magnets in their limbs so you could stick different parts of them together. It was the red one with the round shield, and after that day, without its spiky helmet. Now, I'd lost parts from my knights before. Things like that tended to go missing, and I was never really precious with my toys. But a headless knight just looked wrong. I was convinced that if I walked down the pathway and followed it to the bush, I could find my knight's missing head. So I started walking, turning back to see my house slip away behind the pale gray shroud. I stumbled along the muddy pathway worn deep by the family tractor, collecting scratches from outstretched branches as my dad's hand-me-down rain boots bit at my heels with every step. Occasionally I would have to cling to a tree branch to keep myself from sliding, which would cause my hands and ankles to scrape. Eventually the growls from my stomach and the scratches road-mapping my palms forced me to stop at the sister tree for lunch. As far as I was concerned, the sister tree had always been mine. My private tree fort. Its trunk was formed by 2 trees conjoined at the base, which branched off into a myriad of twisted and bent limbs that reached skyward. In between them, there was a crevice just large enough for me to squeeze into, so I could nestle into the bark walls and enjoy my lunch. I remember I brought an apple and one of those cracker and cheese snack things with me, both snuck from the pantry that morning. I had just finished the last of my crackers when something in my would-be fort caught my attention. Amidst the orange caterpillars and the fallen leaves was a scrap of blue fabric. I tugged at it, pulling and stumbling until I was back outside the tree fort, and the shirt that I had been sitting on was revealed. It was a pale blue button-up, like the kind my dad couldn't fit into anymore but insisted on keeping around. Over the pocket was a white and blue logo. It looked like 2 rings connected, so the smaller one was part of the larger ring, like an O or a Q. After puzzling over my unwanted prize, I returned to the tree to see if anything else had been stashed there. Another few minutes of searching rewarded me with a crossing guard vest, a card in a plastic sheet, and a bulky metal flashlight. You know I started swinging that flashlight around like a lightsaber, right? It wasn't my knight's helmet, but it was the best I was going to find today, and the woods were good enough to be indoors, so why not? My beam swung wildly along the tree line as I imagined cutting down a patrol of troopers before I landed on something in the bushes. The flashlight barely made a sound as it fell into the mud. Not that I noticed, because I was screaming. The figure hunched in the bushes had skin, I think, but so much of it was obscured by dirt and branches it was hard to tell at first. What I could see was all red and ochre. Like raspberries and custard, its voice was dry, but I remember it kept yelling at me to leave. I was stuck in place, though. What was this thing? How was it here? How was it so close to our home? It started to move through the brush, closer to me. I could see its face now, red and white, and eye socket weeping blood. I ran. I could see its teeth through its cheeks. I ran away from the sister tree and back down the muddy pathway. I couldn't shake that look on its face when it reached out an arm toward me, skin hanging off of it. I could still smell the smoke coiling around its bare skin. Their bare skin. Their face. I didn't care about the night or the stuff in the tree anymore. I didn't want to think about how their hair stuck to them in clumps and patches. I wanted to forget the blistered tongue behind their teeth. I could still see the remaining eye, wide and pleading with me. My boots tripped back over the railroad tracks. I still didn't feel safe. I was 9 years old. What was I supposed to do? That night, once I was hidden away in my bed, I watched out the window as fires danced behind the trees. We moved before the fall. My dad claimed he was getting too old to split firewood. I revisited the farm only once. The town had changed. There were these new neighborhoods. The school had a bunch of those portable classrooms in the field where the baseball diamond used to be. There was even a Walmart now. The house loomed over the surrounding land like a great oak, unmarked and silent against a cloudless afternoon sky. As my car followed the long driveway, I tracked the flight of a helicopter over Mr. Severino's field, and thought it was strange to see everything so bare. The cornfields of my youth had been replaced with barren soil, and the old barn shed now lay in a jagged heap. I approached the fence line that separated my home from the outside world. Not a wooden fence line, no. Not anymore. It had been replaced at some point with a chain-link fence covered in signage warning about trespassing and surveillance. Through the chain link that now covered much of the property, I could just see the sister tree in the middle of a scorched clearing. It was watching over the young aspens that dotted the ground and mingled with bright orange flags. I tried to ignore how familiar the logo on the fence signs looked. Blue on white. An O with the smaller Q linked to it. I'd seen it all over town that day. I gave the pathway one last look and left my private tree fort behind.